A psychic on a peer read her life at 17, and everything came true. Today, I chat with Sarah Lawrence, a former media professional turned spiritual practitioner, whose path led her from the halls of the BBC to the deeper landscapes of the soul. A channel, reflexologist, and EMF balancing technique practitioner, Sarah shares how a lifetime of high sensitivity and a series of profound spiritual experiences guided her to her true work. We talk about growing up as an intuitive child in a small British village, haunted hotel encounters, and the moment a message from her deceased uncle cracked her open to the unseen world. Sarah also explains the concept of the divine soul blueprint, what it's like to read the Akashic records, and how our energy field holds the key to living a more aligned life. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Sarah Lawrence, thank you so much for joining me on the Oracle podcast. Pleasure to have you. I'm looking forward to learning a little bit more about you and your story. And of course, you're one of Oracle's vetted practitioners. You do Akashic records, you're a reflexologist and an EMF balancing technique practitioner, which you're going to also tell us a little bit more about. But I'll start off with asking you this, in this period of your life, Sarah, what is it that you're focused on? What is your mission?
Oh, thanks, Wendy, so much for having me. And hello, everyone out there. It's a big question and mission, isn't it? But I think what I was able to distill it down into is how to empower people to live their lives through their truth. Now, that's no mean feat. But, when we learn to connect more and more with our own true identity, which often we're socialized and conditioned out of, that's when we can really start aligning with the innate nature of who we are. And I was thinking about doing this podcast last night, and I'm into rock music. That's one of the things I'm into. And I was listening to Bon Jovi, and there's a lovely line in It's My Life that says, "My heart is like the open highway." And I think that's an ideal, isn't it, for all of us, especially in this work, to work with the open heart. But it can be really hard to do in daily life. So that's the mission. That's why it's important to me, because it's something that people struggle with. And I certainly have too in my life.
Why is this something that you make your mission?
I have quite a high sensitivity to locations, situations, people. There's lots of labels for that, isn't there? Like we've heard people talk about highly sensitive people and so on and so forth. But I've always had this ability to kind of lean in a little bit to people's energy. And I can kind of sense on some level how much of their truth they might be aligning with or not. I'm not voyeuristic about it. I used to be, because I didn't really know what it was. I went into a room and I understood things about people, but now I manage that. And so I do understand that people have a lot of things going on in their lives, and life can be difficult if you're not true to who you are. So for me, for example, that meant 2 very difficult marriages, because I went into marriage kind of because it was expected of me. So that caused struggles in my life. Does that make sense?
Sure. And I think everybody aims to be the truest version of themselves. And it is so hard because we are really pulled in so many different directions from society. And I think most of the time don't even realize it, right? Until oftentimes we get to middle age and look around and don't recognize ourselves. I see that a lot in especially friends around my age, middle-aged women. But it is so important. How did you get to know yourself and live your truth? Is there something that you learned along the way?
Well, a hard lesson to learn. I was somewhat of a people pleaser in order to connect with other people. And so I had to find ways to shift out of that. And in general, I found myself on a life path of, first of all, developing myself through work, through something called NLP, or neuro-linguistic programming, where I was able to, find ways to, it was just on a very simple level, to help people learn more easily. And then after that, the personal growth started, and I started asking the bigger questions. So, over the last few years, one of the biggest anchors for me that I've learned is that at the soul level, when we inquire into our higher self, our intuition, all of that kind of thing, because I was having those kind of experiences too, that we all have a divine soul blueprint. And being able to align with that and really understand it more deeply and then experiment with it in life has meant that I'm able to get through life's challenges with a lot more life force or chi, which everyone wants, right? We all want more energy in our life. And in some cases, less difficulty. Plus, in the Akashic Records, I have what's called a primary life lesson of trust. So, life lessons are like a slide rule. We don't go into life with a primary life lesson like that necessarily to have a wonderful life where you can trust everyone. It can be a real journey.
To somebody that might not have heard the term before, can you explain what is a divine soul blueprint?
Certainly. So if we all imagine ourselves in the field or ocean or sea of energy outside of the body as souls, we're originally part of creator consciousness, all that there is, whatever name somebody would like to apply to that. And when a soul decides to individuate or basically start incarnating, it has to individuate and separate itself like into a little drop from the rest of the field. And then in order to be able to incarnate, the divine soul blueprint is like a framework that the soul drips squeezes itself into to be able to enter the system of incarnation, which is the Akashic Records. So that's what a blueprint is. And everyone's soul little drop, if you like, is very unique, very individual, because the soul has chosen to individuate. And there are certain vibrational aspects to each soul that it's very enlightening and validating to reconnect to as on the spiritual path.
And with each drop being completely different to the next, what makes it different? I'm thinking of snowflakes. When you look at a snowflake, every snowflake's different, and there we can see that it's physically different. What makes us different to each other in this case as souls here on Earth?
Oh, I love that analogy. I love that, the snowflake. It's beautiful. So because that's multidimensional and also kind of crystalline as well. So it can give people that energetic sense. So yes, one of the ways we can learn to attune, if you like, to our divine soul blueprint is through something called the primary energy centers. So, a lot of us might know about chakras or energy centers in the body, which, manage our nervous system, parasympathetic, lots of other, energy movement around the body. But the primary energy centers are at the soul level in this blueprint. So it means that they're eternal. If you happen to believe, in reincarnation, then each life that you live, you can realign with this energy of who you are at soul level. And so my primary energy center, just to give you an example, because, our minds need that to hook into, is I'm primary in divine communication, which is all about being the intuitive and the natural channel. And I didn't know that, but it was always happening for me throughout my life. So that's why I was having weird and odd experiences. And that's why I ended up on the spiritual journey in the first place. So it can be really enlightening and validating to understand what your primary and or secondary energy centers are. So that's just one aspect of aligning with the soul blueprint.
Let's talk a little bit more about you and your story. Growing up, I know you're from the UK, you're now in the United States, but what was your childhood like? What kind of a child were you? And especially relating to your understanding of spirituality and yourself. What was it like growing up and how did you fit into the world?
Probably the fitting in part was at times with difficulty. We could probably do just a podcast on that. So I'm sure there's people here that could resonate. But I was born I lived most of my time in a small British village. I was born in the outskirts of London, but I lived in a small British village. And my mum was a real country lover. My dad was a civil engineer, production engineer. So my mum was kind of quite spiritually connected, actually. She used to call in hedgehogs, and we had a squirrel knock on the front door, and we would feed it Rice Krispies. She had this innate connection with animals. So I would say I was quite dreamy, artistic. I always got told I was overly imaginative, but I used to paint and draw a lot, and I loved music. My parents had to put up with me and my brother playing our music centres, you know, in not a very well insulated house. So, but it was lovely. My mum made it beautiful, but my dad really struggled because he had identity struggles. And this might be some of where, you know, my sense of wanting to understand my own identity more fully comes from. And because he had a rough childhood, as did my mum, but it affected him more. He was a very heavy smoker. He was a 60 a day guy before we knew the truth, you know, about that. And so my mum knew at some level that was problematic for us as kids. And so there was always this struggle. And he had emotional issues because of a rotten childhood. So there were, you know, there was ups and downs, I would say. It could sometimes be like an emotional roller coaster. So there was the idyllic, dreamy, artistic side. And then there was the reality of my dad struggling. And then, of course, school and all that goes with it. So it's kind of a bit of a mixed bag there, like most people, I'm sure.
Can you maybe share with us 2 or 3 of your most pivotal spiritual moments that shaped you into who you are today and sort of made you see life from a spiritual perspective?
Yes, I think one of the most powerful ones, because I'd always had spiritual experiences, but I used to put them in a box. You know what I mean? Because when I was young, I went and had, at the age 17, again, trying to find myself, I went and had a reading with a Romany gypsy on Portsmouth Pier in the UK. You know, it's the classic thing, the purple curtain, you know, all of that. And she read my hands. She read the fronts and backs of my hands. And she said so many accurate, specific things about my life, like the first guy that I would marry, who my boyfriends would be, that I would have a divorce in midlife, which I never thought I would, and I ended up having. You know, so many things, even what my dad had in his drinks cabinet, you know, where my mum worked, and all I told her was my name and my age. And this was at 17. And I kind of sat there and went, it's not just me then, right? Because my mum didn't really have the words for how she did things and remained quite scared of it for most of her life. Because when I told her that at 17, she kind of stared at me and gave me the look, you know, the mother look, like, we don't talk about that. You know, what do you must be lying. There was that kind of reaction. And so that came full circle in the second spiritual experience quite a bit later in life when, you know, like many people have to do this with loved ones or parents. I travelled from the US to the UK because my mum got very sick. This was in 2010. And my brother had set it all up, but he asked me to drive her to hospice. So while I was there, I took her to hospice. And then while we were in the hospice for a period of a couple of weeks that I could be there, she first of all apologised to me for not talking about all the energetic stuff because she said she was too scared. So we had a really lovely reconnection there. But the first day I took her into hospice, I had this major spiritual experience again. So it's linked to the lady, you know, who did the reading, because that was kind of, I always hung on to that and went, I know that's true, because how else could she have seen the truth in me without having some kind of gift? Because that was impossible. That was well before the days of the internet or anything else, you know, so it was impossible. She could have done it any other way. And then while I was sitting there with my mum waiting for the doctor to check us in the room, I didn't know who it was at the time, but I had this male voice in my head, just like you talking to me. And he said, thank you so much for all you're doing for Margaret, Ducky. I went, huh? I completely went into shock because, you know, my mum, that's her name, Margaret, Maggie. And out of my mouth, probably divine communication, came, Mum, who used to call you Ducky? And she just gave me, she was kind of phasing in and out because she wasn't well, you know, but she gave me this really sweet smile and she said, that's Tony. And that was my uncle Tony. But I was like, you know, it's one thing. I'd already started giving Akashic readings for people. The spirit knew the pathway was open. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like the open highway to the heart. They knew it was already open. And then, so what he said next, the other thing that completely blew me away, he said, tell her about the bell. And so I go, Mum, he's talking about the bell. What does that mean? And she smiled again and she said, when they were kids outside their church, they had an old-fashioned fire engine outside the church. And it was one of those pull bells, you know, didn't have the modern thing on it. And apparently Tony encouraged her and they both went up and rang the bell while everyone was in church. So you can imagine what a telling off they got.
Yeah.
Right. And I'd never heard that story from her, but he prompted me to ask her. So that was hugely validating.
I think that most people have had some sort of paranormal experience, even people that don't believe in anything at all. They can get to the end of their life and say, you know what, this happened to me once and I can't explain it, or something happened to my friend, my mom, or somebody that I really trust and we can't explain it. But then some people follow through with that or are more curious about it and end up looking into it a bit more. And some people just dismiss it or just don't think about it again. Obviously, you were more curious and you ended up going that route. Tell me, I know that you worked also in corporate, you were in tech, I believe, and media. Tell me a little bit about that life and what made you leave that and turn to being a spiritual practitioner.
Right, seems a bit of a leap, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I started at the BBC when I was 18. I wanted to be, I don't know, maybe I thought I was going to marry someone famous. So I started as a BBC secretary, but it's really great there because they really throw you in the deep end and they train you. You're more like a lowly paid intern, really. You do actually get pay of some sort. So I got involved in background support in that industry, which was really interesting. And at that point, I got quite involved in IT, but I think that comes from my divine communication because I was very intuitive about how the systems worked. So in those very early days, they used to teach people how to type, how to use anything really, and yet you had to do your job on it. There was no formal training programs or anything like that. You just had to make the leap. I did that for quite a few years, but that's when the personal development really started in all seriousness because I became self-employed, and anyone who's self-employed knows that at times that's like hitting yourself on the head with a heavy book, on a daily basis. Like, ow, 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 why am I doing this? And occasionally you get a great contract or something, and it's enormous fun.
Yeah.
And you remember why you're doing it. You go, yes, because of this. So I ended up in the field of business training, teaching trainers in business who had to design courseware. And then ultimately it was kind of a unintentional career break. I married a US citizen, came to the States, had 2 children, like within a 3-year period. So very, very quickly. But then because of that whole process of, being pregnant, going through that aspect of life, and then also experiencing my mum's passing, the whole spiritual aspect, I think, was just waiting to open up. So I started I learned about the Akashic Records through a book that I didn't order that came in the mail from my spiritual book club. And then once I opened the book and I looked at it, I felt energy move over my body because I'd spent 5 years doing energy work with something called the EMF balancing technique. And so it's another series of events, where everything came together and I went, oh, this is really interesting. I could give readings part-time, which is what I did for several years when my kids were small.
And you mentioned EMF, and we were talking about it just before we started recording. Maybe for those that don't know, can you explain a little bit what it is and how it works?
Yes. So think of it as an energetic calibration or strengthening technique. So if you're interested in the spiritual journey, and people talk about expanding vibration and awareness, it helps calibrate and balance your energy bodies to hold more of a charge, if you like, to hold more downloads, to hold more energy from your intuition or higher self, to connect more strongly with your soul level truths. And it also balances. The reason it's called a balancing technique is because it balances the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems as part of the sessions, which is very relaxing, lovely feeling that, we all really need in the modern world. And then the EMF part, EMF balancing technique, that's the electromagnetic field. So every human on the planet has an electromagnetic field. The whole planet has its own electromagnetic field. Even sharks have an electromagnetic field because they use that to, find moving prey. They have sensors on their face to find moving prey. But for us, it's the electromagnetic field is generated from all of our chi or life force in our body, our consciousness energy, our chakras, all of that comes into this electromagnetic field, which there's a technical term for it in EMF, which is the universal calibration lattice. but you could just call it the field, or our aura, and how our aura connects with the field of consciousness. So then people can there are 12 sessions that are taken in order, and then people can have clearing. It helps them with life transition. And in some parts of the world, even Canada now, it's available on insurance, and people are finding great results for it, especially with things like phobias, PTSD, stuff like that. So I was always, because I was so sensitive, I found I was always taking on other people's energy. And I think if any practitioners are watching this, they'll resonate with this. Practitioners always end up aligning with processes that they most need themselves. It's like that becomes their work as well as their clients' work. And so for me, it was the best way to get clear of energy, to get relaxed. In general terms, first 4 phases, all you have to do is lay on a massage table. It's a tough job, as I say to my clients, but somebody's got to do it, right? Phases 5 to 8 is a bit more active because you work with attribute cards before you lay on the table. So you decide which energetic attributes of your system you want to work with before the work commences. And then when you get to phases 9 to 12, you're sitting in a chair and you're working with your own energy. So the whole process is intended to be very empowering. But so let's say phase 1, what's that about? It's about balancing your connection to the earth, your connection to the cosmos, if you like, the greater than self. It's about clearing the heart center and some of the energetic fibers in the body. So some people just have lovely relaxing time through the whole thing. Some people immediately fall asleep. I've had that happen quite a lot with clients. And some people have visions. But the technology it actually uses a lot of hypnotic phrases. They're called say-alouds that were researched over a 40-year period. It's combined with some aspects of Reiki. It's combined with some of the traditions, the Hindu chakra traditions of focusing on chakras. And each practitioner, we're all trained. We have to do 33 hours of training to qualify for each stage to certify. And then you use a script. So you're always saying the same words. So anyone in the world who goes for a phase 1 session of the EMF balancing technique will receive the same session wherever they are in the world with the same hand movements. There are some places where we touch, but most of the time we're working, within the etheric area of the energy field. And so it's a beautiful piece of work.
I have not tried it. I'm quite curious. Tell me, in your sessions, do you do EMF or reflexology or Akashic records, or do you sometimes combine the 3 into one session?
Right. So with the EMF, I tend to keep that separate because it's intended to be that way. But I do make general references to the energy in other sessions because it's like the nose on our face. We all have an electromagnetic field. So becoming aware of it can be helpful in other aspects of work.
And you also do Akashic records, reading, reflexology. What is the most popular thing that you do with clients, and who is your favorite client?
Ooh, 2 lovely questions. Well, I really encourage people to do what I call the soul star reading. And it's popular because it really gives people that sense of alignment with their divine soul blueprint. So it looks at 3 things. It looks at their primary energy center, which I touched on earlier, and a secondary energy center, which some people have. Some people are just primary. It's like whatever shape your nose is, right? It's just like some people have a primary energy center. Some people have a primary and secondary. And then they also learn about their soul group of origination, which some people call starseed groups. So people find that very validating and enlightening, connects them with their gifts. They also look at a past life during that reading that wants to be cleared, has a karmic pattern in it that wants to be cleared. And then also any any blocks and restrictions in present life. So what's lovely about that reading is, for me, I like people to have an immersive experience of the Akashic records in some way. So in this case, they learn about their blueprint. They learn about a past life, and they get the opportunity to start working on clearing blocks in present and past life. And over a period, there's a clearing non-denominational prayer that they use for 21 days. But over that period, they can get that fuller experience of the records. The clients that fit my profile tend to be people who are they're making that awareness step from 4D to 5D. in some way, much like I kept having when I was younger, but I didn't really know what to do with it. You know, the pathway was open, and so people could be having mediumship experiences or really lucid dreams, or just a sense that they're in some kind of repeating pattern that they really would like to get rid of out of their life. And they think that it might come from someplace higher, you know.
Okay. In everything that you've learned in your journey, is there something that you know now that it's really served you well, that you kind of wish everybody would know, that would make a big difference to their lives?
That's such a great question. And it's really hard, isn't it, when you're in this field to find, you know, because there's so many things I would like to say. But this is something I really deeply believe, and it comes back to our heart in some ways too. I believe that innately, because we come from eternal souls, we're all made of light and love. And that for most people, there are different types of souls here, which are also part of our process. But for most people, that's the innate nature of our soul's energy. And a lot of the things that we create on Earth, on planet Earth, are what's called discordant energy. You could use the term negative, but it's just not from the soul, right? We make constructs, you know, we have expectations, we feel guilt, you know, all of these things that we do here in 3D, which is part of the school, I suppose. But I just want people to know that they can just drop that anytime they want to, the more they learn to align with their soul energy, because that's the essential truth of who we are from my view of the world, and how helpful that can be for people in daily life, just to make one simple change of perception or belief.
Absolutely. And perhaps if there was one tip that you could give listeners to improve their lives, one tip that they could do on an ongoing basis that would have a significant impact in their lives, what would you say?
I think right now, everyone here could commit to a 2-minute grounding practice, because, you know, I kind of think when we talk about meditation practice or grounding or any of those things, people get all sorts of pictures in their heads of like, I've got to sit like a pretzel for half an hour, you know, and I'll get bored and I don't have time to fit this in my day or whatever it might be. But, you know, most of us, hopefully anyway, brush our teeth, right? And we might do it hopefully twice a day, at least once. And it takes about 2 minutes. You've even got those timer on the toothbrush that goes off after 2 minutes. So if you can find something that you like to do, whether it's sending golden energy to the center of the earth, or going and standing by a tree, or even having a grounding mat on your bed and laying there for an extra 2 minutes, you know, just connecting with the earth, I think that's so powerful. And that would be my tip, because when we do that, we connect with our Earth Star chakra, which is the one below our feet, and that accesses all the knowledge and awareness of us as living as incarnated humans. So I'd say any kind of 2-minute grounding exercise, even while you're standing there brushing your teeth, would be good.
I like it. And yeah, I think things like brushing your teeth or sitting and turning on the car, things that you do every single day that you can associate. Once you build that association, then it becomes second nature. And then we end up doing it, which is good, because we see the results once we do it multiple times. And I think that if you do it multiple times, you end up wanting to do it more, because actually it feels pretty good. Or you access things that you wouldn't normally, or you get more creative, or you realize things, and that makes you actually want to do it a little bit longer, or to have a second routine. So I agree with you. Something small, starting with something small that you can do every single day, linked to something that you're not going to forget, and then see what develops from there. Beautiful, Sarah. Is there maybe a parting thought that you want to share with the viewers, or anything you'd like to say that we haven't covered?
Yes, I think my parting thought would be kind of to sum up everything we've been talking about today, is that I'd love people to take away, if they took one thing away from this session, it's actually part of my mission too, is that people could understand that we are all part of a system of energy, the Akashic records and, you know, our aura, our personal energy, our thoughts, our feelings and emotions. We're all part of a system of energy, a field of energy that can actually be read, that can actually be interpreted, that can actually be more deeply understood. And just to have that takeaway is very empowering for people, because it takes you one step forward into learning something about the truth of ourselves and others, and it's empowering, and I would love people to live their lives joyfully as much as possible, because that's what we have here right now, and being able to do it from that perspective, I have found enormously supportive and helpful, even when life gets truly difficult.
Beautiful. I agree with you. Just getting to know ourselves, understanding who we really are, understanding what life is and how to navigate it, and using all these different tools. As you said, there is so much in the spiritual world and there's so much to learn. So thank you for doing what you do and sharing your gifts with others and helping others and helping them live their own truth. It's so important, so empowering, so beautiful. And yeah, I appreciate the work you do and appreciate you being on Oracle. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Winnie. It's been a pleasure.